The woman standing in my childhood hallway was holding paint samples in one hand and a set of keys in the other. She looked at me with a confused smile and asked, "Sorry, are you the previous owner's daughter? I was wondering which bedroom was yours before we start renovating." For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. I was standing inside the white two-story house on Hawthorne Lane, where I had taken my first steps, where my grandmother taught me how to bake, where I studied for exams at the kitchen table, and where I spent years believing I still had a place. But the woman standing in front of me was not a guest. She was the new owner. My name is Mara Ellis. I was 39 years old when I discovered that my parents had sold my childhood home without telling me. Not after asking me, not after discussing it, not even after sending me a message. They had already closed the sale. The strangest part was that my entire family was sitting in the dining room celebrating. My mother, Donna, was pouring coffee. My father, Michael, was talking about how everything had finally worked out. My younger brother, Ryan, was smiling because the money from the sale was going to save his struggling brewery. And everyone acted like I was the only person in the room who did not understand what was happening. My mother looked at me and said, "Mara, don't make this emotional. We handled the paperwork because we knew you would struggle with letting go." That sentence hurt more than the sale itself, because it told me they had not forgotten me, they had considered me, they had decided I did not matter. I looked toward the dining room table and noticed a thick closing folder sitting beside my father's coffee cup. The title company logo was visible on the corner. I did not say anything. I did not scream. I did not ask why they betrayed me. I simply remembered the name on that folder. Because what my parents did not know was that this house was not only a memory, it was something I legally owned. And years earlier, I had made sure there was proof. Proof they apparently forgot existed. Before I continue this story, I want to say something. If you have ever been the person in your family who was expected to give everything, stay quiet, and accept being overlooked, because that's just how family works, you will understand why this story was so difficult for me to tell. Sometimes the hardest betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from people who know exactly where your heart is. But to understand why that Sunday morning changed everything, I need to take you back. Back to the house before it became a legal battle. Back to the family I spent years trying to protect. Because the truth is, my parents did not wake up one day and suddenly decide to erase me. They had been teaching me for decades that my sacrifices belonged to everyone else, and I had spent far too long believing them. The house on Hawthorne Lane was never just a building to me. It was the place where my grandmother June made ordinary moments feel important. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon every Saturday morning because she always baked something before anyone else woke up. She kept handwritten recipes in a small wooden box that looked older than the house itself. That recipe box eventually became the only thing I carried away when everything changed. But at the time, I never imagined I would need to save pieces of my childhood from my own family. My father, Michael, was the kind of person who cared deeply about appearances. He wanted neighbors to think we were successful. He wanted relatives to believe our family was organized, respected, and close. My mother, Donna, was similar in a different way. She loved being seen as the person who held everyone together. She organized church events, neighborhood gatherings, and family dinners. From the outside, people thought she was warm and generous. And sometimes she was. That was what made everything complicated. Toxic families are not always filled with people who are cruel every minute. Sometimes they are filled with people who know how to be loving when it benefits their image. Growing up, I was the older daughter, the responsible one, the one who remembered birthdays, finished homework early, helped with chores, and noticed when someone needed something. My younger brother Ryan was different. He was charming, funny, confident. When Ryan failed, people said he was taking risks. When I questioned something, people said I was difficult. That difference followed us into adulthood. The house originally belonged to my grandmother June. Before she passed away, my parents purchased it from her at a reduced price. Years later, when my father lost his job and the mortgage became a serious problem, I stepped in. I was young, but I had a small education trust my grandmother had created for me. I used most of it to prevent foreclosure and help my parents refinance. At the time, my grandmother insisted something important happen. My contribution needed to be recognized. The new deed gave me a 40% ownership interest in the property. My parents agreed. They said it was only fair. They said family protected family. I believed them. I thought that document represented trust. I did not realize that years later, I would need that same document to protect myself from the people who told me I was family. As I grew older, I moved to Columbus, built my career, and created a life away from Hawthorne Lane. I visited less often, not because I stopped caring, because every phone call seemed to become another emergency. A bill, a repair, a favor, a problem Ryan needed help solving. My mother started telling relatives that I had moved beyond the family, but whenever they needed something, they remembered exactly where to find me. That was the role I had always played. The daughter who could handle things, the daughter who would understand, the daughter who would sacrifice. And for years, I accepted that role because I thought love meant being useful. I did not know then that one day, the same people who depended on me would try to convince everyone that I had never belonged there at all. For most of my life, I thought being the responsible daughter was something to be proud of. I thought patience was a strength. I thought being the person everyone could depend on meant I had earned a special place in my family. What I did not understand was that some people do not appreciate the person who always carries the weight. They simply get used to not carrying it themselves. Looking back, I can see that the pattern started when I was still a teenager. I was the daughter who stayed home when my mother needed help. If Donna had a church event, I was the one arranging chairs, preparing food, and cleaning afterward. If Ryan had trouble with school, I was the one sitting beside him at the kitchen table, explaining assignments while my own work waited. My parents called it maturity. They said I was such an old soul. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. Now I understand that sometimes families praise the person who gives the most, because they want that person to keep giving. When Ryan graduated high school, my parents bought him a used car. I remember standing in the driveway watching him hold the keys while everyone celebrated. My father hugged him and said, "This is because we believe in your future." I was happy for my brother, I really was. But when I later mentioned that I needed help replacing my aging laptop for college, my mother smiled and said, "Mara, you're smart enough to figure things out. Ryan needs more support." That sentence stayed with me. Not because of the laptop, because it was the first time I realized that being capable had somehow become a reason people felt comfortable giving me less. When my grandmother June passed away, things became even clearer. Her belongings were divided among the family. Ryan received her gold watch. My mother said, "He's the one who will carry the family name." I received her recipe box. At first, I felt hurt. Then I reminded myself that the box mattered more. That was something I always did. I convinced myself I did not need what I wanted because someone else needed it more. That habit followed me into adulthood. When my father lost his job, I did not hesitate to help. I paid a property tax bill when they were falling behind. I covered repair costs on the house. I spent weekends fixing things, organizing paperwork, and making sure nothing went wrong. My parents always thanked me privately, but publicly, the story was different. At family dinners, my father talked about Ryan's business ideas. "Ryan has an entrepreneurial mind," he would say. Then he would look at me and laugh. "Mara is the practical one. She likes spreadsheets." Everyone would smile. They made it sound harmless. Like a joke. But after hearing the same joke for years, you start realizing people are telling you exactly how they see you. Ryan could dream. I could organize his dreams. Ryan could make mistakes. I could clean up the consequences. The biggest warning came 7 years before the house was sold. I discovered that my father had tried to use the limited power of attorney from the refinance paperwork to begin a home equity application involving the property. When I confronted him, he acted surprised. He said, "Mara, this is just paperwork. Don't make it bigger than it is." But it was bigger than paperwork. It was my name, my ownership, my trust. I contacted attorney Samuel Fields, who had helped with the original refinance. Together, we prepared a formal revocation of that authority. My parents came to his office. They were not happy. My father kept saying I was overreacting. My mother cried and said she could not believe her own daughter would treat them like strangers. That was their favorite argument. Whenever I created a boundary, they acted like I had created a betrayal. But eventually, they signed the acknowledgement. They surrendered the old authority. They agreed they could no longer act on my behalf regarding the property. Afterward, they apologized. My mother hugged me and said, "I'm glad this is behind us." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that maybe we had finally reached an understanding. So I put the documents away. I moved forward, and that was my mistake. I believed an apology meant someone had changed. I did not realize it could simply mean someone wanted the conflict to disappear. The person my family underestimated most was not actually the person they thought I was. For years, my parents described me as cautious, quiet, too serious, the daughter who stayed in the background. But what they did not know was that my quietness had allowed me to build a life completely separate from their approval. I was not just someone who managed paperwork. I was a senior compliance director at a regional credit union. My job was to investigate irregular transactions, review risk reports, and identify problems before they became disasters. Every day, I worked with documents, records, signatures, timelines, evidence. I knew something most people did not. The truth is usually hidden in small details: a missing signature, a changed date, a sentence someone hoped nobody would read carefully. My family thought my attention to detail was just a personality trait. They never realized it was my greatest protection. After the home equity incident, I started keeping records. Not because I expected my parents to betray me, because I had learned that memories become unreliable when people want a different version of events. I created a private digital archive. It contained copies of the deed, tax records, emails, payment receipts, the refinance paperwork, the revocation letter, every major contribution I had made to Hawthorne Lane. I never told anyone about it, not even my parents. They believed I had moved on. They believed I was too emotional about the house to think clearly. They were wrong. The older I became, the more I understood that protecting yourself does not mean you love your family less. Sometimes it means you finally accept that love without boundaries can become a place where people take everything and give nothing back. By the time I discovered the house had been sold, I already had years of records saved. But there was one document I could not find. The most important one. The signed acknowledgement proving my parents knew they no longer had authority over my property. When I called Nora Fields, Samuel's daughter and the attorney now handling my case, I sent her everything I had. She reviewed the files quietly. Then she said something that changed the entire direction of the situation. "Mara, I found the original power of attorney." My stomach dropped, because that was exactly the document my parents had used. Then she continued, "But there is something else." The archived records mention another paper attached to it, a signed acknowledgement of revocation. I closed my eyes. Because suddenly, I understood something. My parents had not simply made a mistake. They had forgotten about the one piece of paper that could prove they knew exactly what they were doing. And for the first time in years, I stopped wondering whether I was overreacting. I started wondering how far they had planned this. After I learned that the missing document might still exist, I expected to feel angry. I expected to feel betrayed. And I did. But more than anything, I felt tired. Because there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly questioning whether your own family sees you clearly. For years, I had tried to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. The difficult daughter, the emotional one, the person who cared too much about details. But the truth was, I was not obsessed with details. I was protecting myself, and there was one person who understood that before anyone else did. My Aunt Vivian. Vivian was my mother's older sister, but she had always felt more like a second mother to me. Not because she replaced Donna. She never tried to. Vivian was different because she listened without immediately defending the family. That sounds like a small thing, but when you grow up in a family where your feelings are constantly explained away, being listened to feels almost unfamiliar. Vivian had seen everything. She had watched me drive across town after work to help my parents with bills. She had watched me spend weekends repairing things around the house while Ryan arrived late with coffee and received praise for showing up. She never confronted my parents dramatically. That was not her personality. Instead, she would quietly ask questions that stayed with me. One afternoon, after another family argument, she asked me, Mara, if a stranger treated you this way, would you still call it kindness? I remember laughing because I did not know how to answer. Family had always been the exception in my mind. I had been taught that relatives were allowed to hurt you in ways nobody else was, that you had to forgive faster, that you had to understand more, that you had to be the bigger person. Vivian was the first person who made me question that. After the Sunday brunch where I discovered the house had been sold, Vivian came to my condo. She arrived with grocery bags, a container of soup, and the kind of silence that tells someone they do not have to pretend everything is okay. We sat at my kitchen counter while I opened the old recipe box I had taken from Hawthorne Lane. Inside were my grandmother's handwritten cards, her notes in the margins. Little reminders about ingredients, small pieces of her personality that survived after she was gone. There was also an old brass key, the original house key. I held it in my hand for a long time. I told Vivian, I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me still thought they would eventually admit what I did for that house. Vivian looked at me and said, Mara, I don't think you wanted the house. I think you wanted them to acknowledge that you mattered. That was the sentence that finally broke through the wall I had built. Because she was right. The money mattered. The legal ownership mattered. But the deepest wound was something else. My parents had taken something I helped save and acted like I was just a guest who happened to remember the address. Vivian did not tell me to fight. She did not tell me to forgive. She asked one question. What outcome lets you respect yourself when this is over? I carried that question with me. Later that evening, Nora called. She told me her firm had started retrieving archived records from Samuel Fields's retired office. Because Samuel had kept physical copies of important property documents, there was a chance the missing acknowledgement had survived. Not scanned, not uploaded, not sitting in an online database. A real paper file, the kind people forget about because they assume old documents disappear. Then Vivian remembered something else. Something that made both of us stop talking. She said, Mara, I don't know if this matters, but your mother called me a few months ago. I looked up. What did she ask? Vivian hesitated. She asked if you still kept old legal papers. My chest tightened. At the time, I thought she was asking about taxes, Vivian continued. I didn't think anything of it, but now we both understood. My mother had not been casually curious. She had been trying to find out what I knew, what I had saved, what evidence existed, and that changed everything. Because it meant the sale was not just careless, there had been preparation. After that conversation, I started looking back at months of small moments that I had ignored. Questions my parents asked, comments they made, things that seemed random at the time. My father asking whether I ever planned to move back to Cedar Ridge. My mother asking if I still had all those old files. Ryan joking that I was probably the only person who still cared about an old house. At the time, I thought they were just being insensitive. Now, I wondered if they were measuring my reaction before they made their move. Nora began reviewing public records. The information came slowly, and every new piece made the situation heavier. The house had not been sold recently. It had been sold 10 days before the brunch where I found out. 10 days. My parents had invited me to a family gathering knowing the house was already gone. They had allowed me to walk into my childhood home as if nothing had changed. They wanted the news to arrive after the paperwork was finished. After the money was transferred. After everyone else accepted the new reality. The buyers were Daniel and Priya Mercer, a couple relocating for work. They were not villains. They were not part of my family's plan. They were simply people who believed they were buying a normal property through a normal process. That mattered to me. Because I did not want innocent people hurt because my parents made dishonest choices. But then Nora found the most troubling detail. The title file showed that my interest in the property had been transferred before the sale, and the person who signed on my behalf was my father, using the old power of attorney, the same one that had been revoked years earlier. I stared at the document on my computer screen. I read the words again, then again, because sometimes your mind tries to protect you from accepting something painful. My father had not misunderstood. My mother had not forgotten. They had used a document they knew was no longer valid, and they had trusted that I would stay quiet long enough for it to become impossible to challenge. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. Only one sentence. Please don't make this ugly before Ryan's announcement dinner. I read it 3 times, because suddenly I understood. They were not inviting me to dinner because they wanted to repair the family. They were inviting me because they needed me to continue playing my old role. The quiet daughter. The understanding daughter. The daughter who would sacrifice herself so everyone else could celebrate. But they did not know something yet. I was done being the person who protected everyone from the consequences of their own choices. And that dinner was about to show everyone exactly what they had done. I almost did not go to Ryan's announcement dinner. When my mother sent that message telling me not to make this ugly, my first instinct was to ignore it. I wanted to protect my peace. I wanted to stay home, close my laptop, make tea, and let the lawyers handle everything. But Nora gave me advice that stayed with me. She said, "Mara, you don't have to attend to prove anything, but if you choose to go, go because you are no longer afraid of being seen." That sentence changed my perspective. For years, my family controlled the story because they controlled the room. They spoke first. They explained first. They told everyone what happened before I even knew there was something to defend myself against. So I decided to go, not to argue, not to expose them, not to create a scene. I went because I wanted to see whether they still believed I was the same person they had spent years underestimating. The dinner was held in a private room at a downtown restaurant. A long wooden table, white napkins folded neatly beside every plate, small candles in glass holders, a slideshow playing on the wall. It looked like a celebration, and that was exactly what my parents wanted everyone to see. Donna greeted me at the entrance with a smile that looked practiced. "There she is," she said. "Our busy daughter finally made time for family." The words sounded friendly, but I knew my mother well enough to hear what was underneath them. A reminder. A small public criticism disguised as affection. Vivian was already there. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze when I sat beside her. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She knew I was trying to stay calm. Across the room, Ryan was laughing with friends and talking about his brewery. He looked excited, and for a moment, I felt something I did not expect. Sadness, because despite everything, he was still my little brother, the person I used to help with homework, the person I defended when our parents were disappointed in him. But then the slideshow started. Pictures of Ryan's brewery, pictures of him at events, pictures of him shaking hands with investors. My father stood up and raised his glass. "I want everyone to know how proud we are of Ryan," he said. "He has always had the courage to chase his dreams." Everyone applauded. Then my father looked at my mother. And none of this would be possible without Donna making difficult decisions. I felt my stomach tighten, because I knew where this was going. My father continued. "The old house represented years of memories, but sometimes you have to let go of the past to build the future." The room applauded again. The old house. Not my house. Not the house I helped save. The old house. Like it was already something that belonged only to history. Then my mother stood. She looked directly at me. That was when I knew this was not accidental. She had planned this. "Mara," she said warmly, "I hope you know that everything we did was for the family." I placed my glass down. "I'm not sure what you mean," she smiled. "The house." The entire room became quieter. My mother continued. "We know you have always been sentimental. That's why we handled everything carefully." Carefully. That word almost made me laugh. Because nothing about this was careful. It was calculated. My mother tilted her head. "You have your own life now. You have your career. You don't need to be tied down by an old property." I looked around the table. Some relatives avoided eye contact. Some looked confused. Some were waiting to see what would happen next. Then Donna said the sentence I will never forget. "Some people hold on to memories because they don't know how to build something new." There it was, the public version of the story. I was emotional. They were practical. I was holding them back. They were moving forward. Ryan leaned back in his chair and said, "Honestly, Mara, I thought you would understand. You never wanted to live there anyway." I looked at him. "I never said I didn't care about the house." Ryan shrugged. You know what I mean. No. I did not know what he meant. Because apparently, my silence had become permission for everyone else to rewrite my feelings. Then my father spoke. Mara, don't turn this into something it isn't. I looked at him. Then explain something to me. Why was my name removed from property I legally owned? The room went silent. My father did not look surprised. That was the moment I noticed something important. He was prepared. He leaned back and said calmly, "We had authority." My heart started beating faster. Then he added, "You signed it years ago." For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The old version of me would have started explaining. I would have listed every payment, every document, every sacrifice. I would have tried to convince them that I deserved to be heard. But something inside me had changed, because I finally understood. People who respect you do not need a perfect argument before they acknowledge your pain. I looked at my father and asked one question. Did you tell the title company I had revoked that authority? His expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. The hesitation, the tiny pause, the moment where he realized I was not guessing. Ryan immediately jumped in. Can we not do this here? My mother sighed. This is exactly what we were afraid of. Mara making everything dramatic. That was when she reached under the table and brought out a frame. Inside it was a photograph of the old house, the front porch, the white paint, the flowers near the steps. She handed it toward me. We thought you would appreciate having this. I stared at the picture, then at her. This is what you brought me? My mother smiled sadly. It's a piece of the home you loved. A piece. After taking away the actual thing. Several people laughed quietly. Not because they thought it was funny, because they were uncomfortable. But that sound hurt. Because I had spent years proving my love through actions, and now they were reducing my connection to a framed photograph. I slowly pushed the frame back across the table. I don't want a picture of something you took from me. Nobody spoke. The room felt frozen. Then I stood. My mother whispered, Mara, don't walk away from your family. I looked at her, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to convince her. I'm not walking away from my family. I paused. I'm walking away from being treated like I don't matter. Then I left. I held myself together until I reached Vivian's car. The second the door closed, I broke down. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears I had been holding back for years. Vivian sat beside me and let me cry. After a few minutes, my phone rang. It was Nora. I answered. Mara, she said. Her voice was different, more serious. The archived records arrived. I wiped my face. What did you find? There was a pause. Then she said, the paper your parents forgot about. And suddenly, after years of being told I was too emotional, too difficult, and too sensitive, I finally had the one thing nobody could argue with: proof. The next morning, I sat across from Nora Fields in her office, staring at a piece of paper that had the power to change everything. It was not a dramatic-looking document. It was not hidden inside a locked safe. It was not some mysterious family secret, written in a way that only a lawyer could understand. It was one ordinary page, one page that my parents probably thought no one would ever find. At the top, it said, Acknowledgement of Revocation and Surrender of Authority. My hands were shaking slightly as I read the names. Michael Ellis, Donna Ellis, my parents. 7 years earlier, they had signed a document confirming that they no longer had authority to act on my behalf regarding Hawthorne Lane. 7 years earlier, they had acknowledged the exact thing they later claimed did not exist. Nora watched me carefully. Mara, she said softly, I want you to understand what this means and what it does not mean. I looked up. What do you mean? She folded her hands on the table. This does not automatically undo the sale. The buyers, Daniel and Priya Mercer, appear to have purchased the property in good faith. The law protects people who are not involved in the wrongdoing. I nodded slowly. That part mattered to me. Because as angry as I was at my parents, I did not want another family punished for something they did not do. Nora continued, but this document is extremely important because it proves knowledge. She tapped the paper gently. Your parents cannot say they misunderstood. They cannot say they thought the authority was still active. They signed this. They acknowledged it. I looked back down at the signature. I remembered that day. The small office. My father's frustration. My mother's tears. The way they made me feel guilty for protecting myself. And now I was looking at proof that they knew exactly what they were doing. That was the part that hurt the most. Not that they made a mistake. Not that they misunderstood. They knew. They knew, and they decided my silence was more valuable than my consent. Nora opened another folder. Inside were the other pieces. The old deed, the refinance documents, the revocation letter, emails, payment records, the earlier home equity application. The timeline I had created years before, my own preparation, my own proof, everything I had saved because some part of me knew I needed to. You built a very strong record, Nora said. I almost laughed. For years, my family had called me overly cautious, too serious, too focused on details. But the same qualities they criticized were the reason I was sitting there with evidence instead of just a painful story. I never wanted this, I said. Nora looked at me. I know. I never wanted to fight them over the house. I know. I just wanted them to tell me the truth. That was the hardest sentence to say. Because underneath all the paperwork and legal language, that was the real betrayal. I did not lose a house. I lost the belief that my parents would choose honesty when honesty was difficult. Nora nodded. Then our goal should reflect that. She explained the options. The title company would be notified. The buyer's attorney would be contacted. The insurance company would review the transfer. If possible, they would resolve the ownership issue without forcing the Mercers into a painful legal battle. I agreed. I did not want revenge. I wanted accountability. There was a difference. The following days were quiet. Almost too quiet. My parents stopped calling. Ryan stopped posting about the brewery. The family group chat, usually full of messages about birthdays, dinners, and weekend plans, became completely silent. But silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes it means people are waiting to see who breaks first. 3 days later, my mother sent a message. Mara, we need to talk before this gets out of control. I stared at the words for a long time. Because even then, she did not say, I'm sorry. She did not say, we were wrong. She said, before this gets out of control. As if the problem was not what they did. The problem was my reaction. I did not answer. An hour later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was only 30 seconds. Mara, I don't know what you think you found, but you are misunderstanding the situation. We need to handle this as a family. That sentence told me everything. They still believed family meant private. They still believed family meant problems should disappear behind closed doors. They still believed I would choose comfort over truth, but that was no longer who I was. A week later, Nora informed me that my parents had requested mediation. They wanted to meet, they wanted to explain, and they wanted me to understand their side. Part of me wondered if I should agree, because even after everything, a small part of me still wanted the impossible. I wanted my parents to look at me and finally say, we hurt you. Not, we had reasons. Not, we were trying to help. Not, you misunderstood. Just the truth. Vivian came over that night. We sat on my balcony with 2 cups of coffee. I told her about the mediation request. She listened. Then she asked me something. Do you want an apology, Mara? I thought about it. Yes. Or do you want peace? That question stayed with me, because I realized those 2 things were not always the same. Sometimes people apologize because they miss access to you, not because they understand the damage they caused. The mediation was scheduled for 2 weeks later. A conference room, neutral location, lawyers present, documents ready. For the first time in my life, I was going to sit across from my parents without trying to earn their approval. I was going there as someone who knew the truth, and they were about to learn something they never expected. The quiet daughter they ignored was no longer asking for permission to speak. She was bringing evidence. The conference room at the title company was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. There were no family pictures, no old memories, no familiar furniture from Hawthorne Lane. Just a long table, full folders, legal pads, coffee cups, and people waiting for facts. For once, nobody could rewrite the story with emotion alone. Everyone was there. Me, Nora, my parents, Ryan, the title insurer's attorney, the closing officer, Daniel and Priya Mercer with their lawyer. Vivian waited outside, because she knew this was something I needed to face myself. My father sat across from me, wearing the same navy suit he wore to business meetings. That detail bothered me more than I expected, because it reminded me that he was approaching this like a negotiation, not like a father speaking to his daughter. The meeting began calmly. Too calmly. My father was the first to speak. Mara, I think everyone here agrees this situation has become bigger than it needed to be. There it was, the first attempt to shrink what happened. Not a fraudulent transfer, not a misuse of authority. A situation. Nora opened her folder. We are here because the property was transferred using a power of attorney that had already been revoked. My mother immediately shook her head. That was not our intention. Nora looked at the document. Your intention is not the only issue. Your knowledge matters. The room became quiet. My father leaned forward. Mara, we thought the paperwork was still valid. I looked at him. You signed a paper saying it was not. Nobody moved. Nora placed the acknowledgement on the table. The truth was finally sitting where everyone could see it. My mother looked away. Ryan looked uncomfortable, and for the first time, my father did not have an immediate answer, because the document did something my explanations never could. It removed the argument. The truth did not need to raise its voice. It had proof. The hardest part of the entire process was not the conference room. It was what happened afterward. People often imagine that once the truth comes out, everything becomes simple. They imagine the person who was hurt finally gets justice, the people who caused the pain immediately understand, and everyone moves forward. But real life is rarely that clean. Sometimes the truth changes the situation, but it does not instantly change people. After the mediation, my parents did what I expected. They apologized, but not in the way I had hoped for years. My mother sent me a handwritten letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately. For a moment, I felt that old familiar feeling. Hope. The part of me that was still the little girl waiting for her mother to choose her. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter started with, Mara, we never wanted to hurt you. I kept reading. She explained that they were under pressure. She explained that Ryan's brewery was struggling. She explained that they believed selling the house was the only way to help him. She explained that they thought I would understand because I had always been the reasonable one. But something was missing. The words I had waited for. I was wrong. I violated your trust. I took something that belonged to you. Those words never appeared. Instead, the letter became another explanation. Another reason. Another reminder that everyone's circumstances mattered, except mine. At the bottom, my mother wrote, We are still your parents. Family should not throw away family over mistakes. I read that sentence several times. Because I finally understood something. A mistake is something you make accidentally. A choice is something you make after thinking. They had choices. They had options. They had opportunities to tell me the truth. They chose silence every time. My father tried a different approach. He called. At first he apologized. Then, within minutes, the conversation shifted. He talked about the legal fees, the stress, the embarrassment, the questions from relatives. He said, Mara, you have to understand how difficult this has been for us. And I remember sitting there quietly, realizing he still did not understand. Even now. Even after everything. He was describing the pain of facing consequences, not the pain he caused. That was the moment I stopped waiting for a different version of my parents to appear. Because sometimes closure does not come from someone finally admitting they hurt you. Sometimes closure comes from accepting that they may never understand. Ryan was the last person I expected to hear from. For weeks he blamed me indirectly. He told relatives that I was being unreasonable, that I was financially secure and did not need the money, that I was choosing paperwork over family. But eventually, after his brewery plans collapsed and the reality of his situation became clear, he sent me a message. It was longer than I expected. He admitted that he had been selfish. He admitted that he had allowed our parents to convince him that my help was something he was entitled to. He apologized for what he said at the dinner, especially the moment when he told me I never wanted the house. That apology was different. Not perfect, but different, because for the first time, someone in my family acknowledged my experience instead of explaining it away. I accepted the apology, but accepting an apology does not mean returning to the same relationship. That was something I had to learn. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can forgive someone and still decide they no longer get the same place in your life. 6 months after the sale, I received an email from Priya Mercer. I had not expected to hear from her. She and Daniel had become the owners of Hawthorne Lane after everything was resolved, and I was grateful the legal process had protected them. Her message was simple. She said they had been renovating the kitchen and found something behind one of the old cabinets. She asked if I wanted it. For a few minutes, I stared at the screen. Because I knew what going back to that house could mean. It could reopen everything. It could remind me of what I lost. Or maybe it could help me finally let go. I agreed to meet. When I arrived at Hawthorne Lane, I had to stop in the driveway for a moment. The house looked different. The paint was fresh, the porch had been repaired, the garden was healthier, but the lilac bushes near the front window were still there. The same ones my grandmother planted. Priya met me at the door. She was kind, not overly emotional, not pretending to understand something she had not lived. Just kind. She handed me a small envelope. "We found this tucked behind the cabinet," she said. Inside was a faded piece of paper. My grandmother's handwriting. A note she had written years ago. It said, "A home should make room for the people who care for it." I held the paper quietly, because those words meant more to me than I expected. For years, I thought losing Hawthorne Lane meant losing my place, but I finally understood something. A home is not just walls. It is not a deed. It is not a room where people decide whether you belong. A home is where your presence is respected, where your voice matters, where your love is not measured by what you provide. I used part of the settlement to buy a small 1920s bungalow outside Columbus. It was not as large as Hawthorne Lane, it did not carry decades of family history, and that was exactly why I loved it. Every decision inside that house was mine. The paint colors, the furniture, the people I invited through the door. I placed my grandmother's recipe box in the kitchen. I kept the old brass key beside it. Not because I was holding on to the past, because I was honoring where I came from, without allowing it to control where I was going. I started mentoring younger women at work about documentation, financial awareness, and protecting their own interests. Because I learned something painful. Many people are not harmed because they are weak. They are harmed because they trust people who should have protected them. My relationship with my parents remained distant. My father eventually sent a shorter letter. This time it was different. He finally wrote the words he avoided for months. I was wrong. It did not erase everything. It did not rebuild the relationship overnight, but it was the first honest thing he had given me in a long time. I allowed limited written contact, nothing more. No surprise visits, no guilt, no requests for money. No pretending the past did not happen. My mother was not ready to take full responsibility, so I kept my distance. And that was okay. I used to believe boundaries were a punishment. Now I know they are protection. The forgotten paper my parents failed to hide did not give me my childhood back. It did something more important. It stopped them from rewriting my adulthood. For years, I thought winning meant proving that I was right. But I was wrong. Winning was waking up one day and realizing I no longer needed people who refused to see my value. I did not get revenge. I got peace. And honestly, that was worth more than any house. If you have ever been the person in your family who was expected to stay quiet, keep giving, or accept less because you were the strong one, I want you to know something. Your kindness does not mean people are entitled to your sacrifice. Your love does not require you to disappear, and your voice matters, even when the people closest to you choose not to hear it. If this story connected with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the stories we carry quietly are the ones someone else needs to hear. And if you want more stories about resilience, boundaries, and finding your way back to yourself, consider subscribing. Because sometimes, the greatest victory is not getting back what was taken from you. It is building a life where nobody can take you away from yourself again.